you're going to encounter some of the worst days of your life during entrepreneurship, which is so accurate. But what's crazy sometimes is your worst day and your best day happen on the same day.
Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship by Venture for Canada. Venture for Canada is a national charity on a mission to foster the entrepreneurial skills and mindsets of young Canadians. Our vision is a Canada where young people can equitably realize their entrepreneurial potential to help build one of the most prosperous entrepreneurial ecosystems in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Today, I have two incredible women, Jenessa and Laura. One of them is an Olympic pro athlete turned fashion founder turned tech founder. They're going to talk to you about how to do things that you don't want to do, the unglamorous and the glamorous aspects of entrepreneurship, co-founding relationship secrets, and how to run a tech company without being an official tech founder. So it's worth the listen. Jenessa is a two-time founder and is the founder and CEO of Ecologicca. And really, this company is about connecting your health and the environment. And it was born initially out of Jenessa's own personal health struggles, which she will talk about. Laura is the co-founder and COO of Ecologicca and the founder of What in the Tech. She runs a tech consulting business, sits on a number of boards, and she is an angel investor of 4 women-founded companies. She was also named the Peaks Emerging Leaders in 2024. So this is a conversation that you don't want to miss. They both are really honest and open and vulnerable. And thank you and welcome to the show. So hello, Laura and Jenessa. It is my total pleasure to have you on our podcast and meeting our community today. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, great to be here, Gina.
I'm excited to dive in. So my first question is for you, Laura. I want to understand from you, you're an angel turned employee, turned co-founder of Jenessa's company, Ecologicca. Well, you're both of your companies. I just want to understand what inspired you to take that leap.
Yeah, I got the question recently, like, oh, is it normal for an angel investor to become a co-founder? And I didn't really know how to answer it because I'm truly not sure. When I met Jenessa, she had just pitched the company. It looked, I would say, very different from what it is today and what it's become over the last year. But I was so inspired with how much she was able to do with so little. And I know like scrappiness, if you will, is very much kind of an entrepreneurial quality that people look for. But I think people really underestimate when it comes to actual physical products and hardware products, especially when they're so scientific in nature, how much capital and how capital intensive those things can be. And so when I found out kind of like how far along she was, the types of people she was talking to, what she had accomplished, they all really, to me, just spoke to somebody who, A, was so passionate about solving the problem, which she personally experiences, so she very much is. And also just the nature of her as a person. And I think, as an angel investor, especially, you're the way I look at it is you're putting money into a slot machine and pulling a lever, right? You're just hoping for the best. And generally my questions to myself are, do I like the founder? Do I think what they're doing is important? And do I think they're capable of executing? And in my head, it was like no question to those questions, like to those answers. And I had personally, a lot of what we talked about that night was inflammation. And I had never thought about air quality, especially indoors, affecting inflammation in any way. But about 2 weeks prior to meeting her, I had just gotten blood test results back. I'd been diagnosed with PCOS finally, officially, and I had a very high amount of inflammation in my body. And it was something that was very top of mind for me. And it had never crossed my mind that air quality could affect it. So immediately I was also drawn into the problem. I was super interested. I went home and did this huge deep dive into the black hole of information. But one of the things that really for me was I was on a sabbatical and I was looking for my next role. And I had been kind of taking some time just introducing Jenessa to anybody I could, being like, she's been heads down building this stuff, but she's so amazing. And so one of the big things was me looking for my next role. And I had even thought about leaving tech entirely. I had ideas of like a brick and mortar store, and it was just all sorts of things were swirling around my head. But when Jenessa approached me and asked me to join Ecologica, it felt like a no-brainer. And while early stage startup was definitely not on my bingo card for a second time around, it felt like an opportunity that I just did not want to miss. And after working together a few months, I think we really established that we are very values aligned, but I think our skills are very different. And so I think it makes for a very good partnership. So when she asked me more kind of officially and to step in into the co-founder position, I was very honored because I know how much work she'd put into the company itself and how important it was to her. And that it was not a decision that she took lightly, but I was very happy to step into the role.
That's very cool, Laura. Thanks so much for sharing that. I have so many questions I want to ask you about angel investing, but I want to jump over to you, Jenessa. And I know that part of your story is that you are a serial entrepreneur and you lost your first company and then 10 days later incorporated this one, which just sounds totally incredible. Can you tell me what that journey, a little bit about what that journey was like to incorporation and then maybe to meeting Laura and deciding to bring Laura on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely not a very common path to just jump right into the next thing. And I definitely don't think I like mentally and emotionally processed the loss of the first company for like several months later. But I think it's just, an entrepreneur's default setting that when a problem arises, you go solutions focused.
Mm.
Um, so my first business was in software and logistics in the retail space, and basically we had gone from inception to kind of this rocket ship growth that every tech entrepreneur wants to experience in a pretty short amount of time, 2 years. Um, and then we also had, a rocket ship collapse because of the pandemic. And I had the idea for Ecologica, or the business that is now Ecologica, in the back of my mind for years and years and years, just because of my own personal health journey. And really, it was solving a problem for myself. So to jump right into it, it had been something that had been building under the surface for almost 2 decades. So it made a lot of sense to just go for it and start the next thing and get the ball rolling.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, a couple years later, Laura came and she joined the team. And I think the biggest thing for me is, we'd had employees before. I'd had a co-founder previously as well. And it is difficult to be in a position where you've really put your blood, sweat, and tears, literally and figuratively, into something, and then bring somebody in at a later stage, even though we're still very much like an early stage business. But I think the thing that really gave me a lot of confidence in Laura is the ownership that she took for the company, even before she was an employee. She was such an advocate of me, such an advocate of the technology, the business. She really identified with the problem on a personal level, which I think is so important when it comes to a co-founder or a founder of a business, that when the conversation came up, or the seed was planted in my mind that maybe it was time for her to join in as a co-founder, it was a very logical next step, that when you have that much confidence in the ownership that somebody is taking for something, you can hand it over and trust them. And that was something that was really amazing and a little bit scary, but also very liberating. And it has completely transformed the business having Laura around.
That's lovely. What a amazing story you have, Jenessa. Um, can you tell me a bit about co-founding with your sister? Because I know your first business was built with your sister as well.
Yeah.
And you co-founded this one with your sister, and then
Yeah.
she chose to leave. Can you tell
Yeah.
me about how that affected you, affected the company, how you rebounded from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Madison and I began our first company statement when we were both still in university.
Mm.
So I was doing my master's, she was doing her undergrad. And I wouldn't say that either of us were ever particularly inclined to the career path of entrepreneur.
Mm.
We weren't averse to it, but it had never been like a job that I had thought that I would go into. And we really became very like personally convicted by the problem of the fast fashion industry. And really the pivotal moment there was I had taken a business ethics class. I was doing my master's in business. And in this business ethics class, we had talked about the working conditions where people were producing and manufacturing fast fashion items and people were dying at work. And I had this moment where I was like, a $5 t-shirt is not worth somebody's life. I will never be able to justify that ever. And I refuse to participate in this going forward. And at that time, when you're a university student, you don't have a lot of money, you don't have a lot of resources. And we wanted to create a way for specifically for women to still have those like magical moments in clothing that makes them feel amazing and special and empowered without all the slavery and waste and pollution. So that was really the foundation of that business. And one of the reasons why Madison and I were great to start that together was because she was also very passionate about that. She was in school for marketing, and all things beautiful is really her it's her forte. So we started that business together, went on quite a ride. And then when we lost all of our contracts in 72 hours, after we'd had a massive, massive scale up, I knew that I wanted to get into what is now Ecologica. And at that time, and we incorporated that business 10 days after getting the call from our biggest retail customer, who's an international brand. And at that time, she just kind of came along with me because we loved working together so much. It was very fun, and our relationship really flourished through it. So she was like, okay, yeah, I'll start this company with you. And after a little while, she just wasn't really passionate about the problem in the same way that I was, because again, it really was a lived experience for me. And she had observed that lived experience as my sister, but she hadn't lived the same experience. And was just getting married and she was moving to Ottawa and just kind of starting a whole new life. And it made sense for her to just start a new life.
Mm-hmm.
So she ended up leaving Ecologica about a year in, and it was super, super hard. I know the feeling for me, which her and I have discussed this like at length. I know the feeling for me when she decided to leave. It honestly felt like betrayal,
Like a
because it
breakup?
wasn't. Yeah, yeah, and it wasn't just you're leaving the company. It was like, you're leaving me to now try to figure this out by myself.
Mm.
We had one another and now we don't. Yeah. A breakup is actually a great way of
It
saying
reminds me of Esther, the Esther Perel series where she talks with business owners and founders.
Yeah.
It reminds you of something like that. Like I feel like I've heard her talk to people with where, we have this perception that business is done void of feelings, or I don't know if we have that anymore, but
Right.
we used to have that perception. And it's as impactful, if not more in some ways, but it's as connected as any relationship is. You're financially connected, you're emotionally connected, your history is connected, your future is connected. And so what else is there? So I think, yeah,
Yeah.
uh, that must have
Well,
been
it's
really
actually
hard.
yeah, and well, it's actually kind of funny to that point because Laura and I talk about this relatively frequently where we're like, we're married.
We're married now. Yeah, we're married.
Like we've got a contractual agreement putting us together
Yeah.
and we are in this. Obviously Laura and I talk to each other more than I talk to anybody else.
Yeah.
But yeah, getting through that time with Madison leaving, it was like a big question mark for sure.
Mm.
And it was, it was sad. It was deflating.
Hmm.
And you kind of wonder, like, were the things that I loved about this business, like, do they still even exist
Mm.
anymore? Or was one of the greatest things that I loved about it the fact that I got to do it with her?
Mm.
So that took a while to move through, and it was not pretty. And I think that a lot of the like luster and creativity was lost at that time.
Mm.
And it did feel like quite a blow.
Mm.
Um, but as the business continued, you just kind of get into autopilot and slog on.
Yeah.
Um, um,
Yeah.
it
That's so
created a
interesting.
way for other people to get involved, like Laura.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
then when Laura joined, that's when like the spark ignited again.
Mm. It sounds like you're made to have a co-founder. It sounds like that's your jam, collaborative work. And Laura, I just wanted to, you had mentioned kind of you have complementary skill sets. And I think that that is something I have heard from another set of co-founders who are both women who I interviewed at the very beginning, who are actually in the fast fashion industry. I'd love, you guys should definitely meet. But they talked about this as well. And I'd love to hear about that. Like, Laura, could you dive into that a bit for me? Like, how do you see your skills and as complementing Jenessa's? And did they ever bump up against one another? And if so, like, what are the tips, tricks, tools that you use to sort of make sure at the end of the day, the business is healthy, your relationship is healthy?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely not technical. Let's start there. I am a 0%. I mean, I guess like maybe 2% technical now because I just listen to everything Janessa tells me about the science and then I'm like a parrot and I'm like, this is what the science says as if I read it. But so she's very much, I would say, the technical person on our team. She was in the lab, she built the prototypes, like she's by all intents and purposes, a technical co-founder, which is, I think, something we'll probably get into a little bit as well. And I'm very much kind of operationally minded. I'm very like process oriented. I'm very focused on like the doing things the right way, which
Mm-hmm.
a bit of a hindrance, whereas Janessa is like very just fast. And so one of the things I always say is I'm a perfectionist, which is not good in a startup. Like you can't be 100% like it's not going to happen. But Janessa goes really fast. And so I think we really balance each other out a little bit, being like, I'm like, Janessa, you need to slow down a little bit. We need to like do this. And she's like, okay, you need to just like let go of that. This isn't going to be perfect. And we just need to get it out. Right. So I think there's a really good balance there
Mm-hmm.
of that aspect, which is at the early stages, a really important kind of game changer that like understanding that balance between speed and perfection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think too, I'm very social butterfly, if you will. I tend to go out a lot. I'm very much like an evangelist verbally and publicly for Ecologica and what we're doing and our successes and all that kind of stuff. Like if, you look at our LinkedIns, I'm the one that's like posting every day and something's happening. And Janessa's like, I'm drafting Janessa being like, you need to get something out, because it's just not where she's comfortable. It's not where she lives. Like she's very good at networking, but she's not going to do that every single night for 5 nights because she'll be miserable. Not that she can't, she absolutely has the skill set for it, but she doesn't enjoy it. And
Yeah.
so I think it's a very like, you kind of need both those aspects, especially at the early stages. And, to your point, we've definitely run up against things where we might disagree or we want to go about things in a different way. And I think One of the things that Jenessa also told me when she asked me to be a co-founder was that she trusted that I would always want to put the business first, and that the business was something that was the most important thing to me when it came to making decisions. And like any decision I made, she knew that I was doing it with the intention of improving the business,
Mm.
nothing else. And so I think we both come to the table in ways that we know that we're both looking out for the best thing for Ecologica, or we think we're looking out for the best thing for Ecologica and for each other. And so there's a huge amount of trust there, that even when something isn't, we don't agree on going about it in a certain way or things like that, we have a pretty comprehensive conversation. Like, we hear each other out, we listen to each other, and we also make sure to bring those things up, right? Because a lot of resentment can build if there's like these decisions that you maybe don't agree with, but you don't agree with them quietly. Then eventually, like, that's just going to explode. So there's been times where I'm like, hey, can we hop on a call, because I don't want to go into the weekend thinking about this, or something like that. And then we hash it out. And that's not to me, and there's a fight or anything, but it's like, okay, here's what I'm feeling. Here's what I'm thinking. This is where it might be coming from. Like, it truly is, like you said, a relationship, right? We have to communicate, especially at this stage, the same way, because a decision that I make today could significantly impact the business tomorrow and vice versa. So we tend to not make huge decisions without each other's input. So we do kind of use our judgment in terms of like, when can I just decide something? When can we collaborate on something? Because there needs to be a balance there too. But I think ultimately it just comes down to like trust and really transparent and candid communication.
Yeah, there's a bravery to it, right? There's a bravery to meeting, and I think that can come from, because when we say, "Oh, you need to be brave," well, where is that coming from? It probably is coming from that deep connection to the company, and that there's something greater than us that is requiring that we collaborate and that we communicate, and that we figure this stuff out, because all of that, any negative or residual emotion, is just going to weigh you down. And so, there's there's definitely sort of a multiple benefits to it, besides just the big one being peace of mind and your own emotional health. So yeah, I appreciate that, Laura, so much. I wanted to touch on that technical co-founder piece, because you had mentioned to me that you get critiqued a lot for that. Neither of you are a technical co-founder. Jenessa, can you tell me a little bit about that? Both of you, I'm interested in both of your perspectives on what that means, what they mean, and how you view that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is something that comes up. It comes up certainly less now than it used to, but sometimes it still comes up where somebody will challenge you on why you and what makes you qualified to do this. And in my opinion, you can teach skill. You can teach really anything that it takes to build and run a business, but you really can't teach passion if it's not innately inside you. Because entrepreneurship is super, super hard. And people say that all the time. And they're like, oh, it's really tough. But then on the outside, everything looks really wonderful. But it's hard. And there are a lot of hard days where you have no idea how to solve a problem that's coming your way. You don't even know how to approach it. And if you are not super passionate about your mission and your vision and why you're there, then it's extremely easy to get derailed, because it's super, super, super hard. And I guess really for me, it all comes down to my founder story, about why being a technical co-founder doesn't really matter to me, honestly. So the reason that Ecologica was started was, when I was 12 years old, I started getting really sick about 2 to 3 times a year with these mysterious illnesses that seemingly came out of nowhere. And I often ended up in the hospital, like very, very severe illnesses. It was, fevers over 105, couldn't eat, sore throat. Sometimes the fevers were so bad, I was having hallucinations. extreme body aches, and I would be down for like 2, 3 weeks. And through this process of consistently being hospitalized as a child, my parents decided that we needed to take matters into our own hands. And they were like, we got to figure out what's wrong with our kid. And my mom is a mental health professional. So we've always had a bit more of a holistic approach to health. And my dad has an autoimmune disease. So with that, you really focus on external factors that trigger inflammation. And using their two unique experiences, we went on this path of trying to go through a process of elimination to figure out what was wrong with me. And when I was 16 years old, I became a professional athlete. This is when I got my first contract, and I was a runner. So I ran the 400-meter hurdles and the 400, competed for Team Canada, did a bunch of the international stuff. And arguably, when you're competing at that level, you are very fit, very healthy, eating right, drinking water, sleeping properly. Like you are doing everything, right. And I was still getting knocked out. So, there was this one day when I walked into, it was actually a restaurant, and I was I think it was in first year university or maybe still in high school. And within a couple of seconds of being in this restaurant, I used to call it the icy hand of death. And that was the first symptom that I knew I was going to be super, super, super sick. And I walk into this restaurant and I could just feel this like grip on the back of my neck and just go into my head and into my spine. And I knew if I stayed there, I was going to be in the hospital in 6 hours. So I left and the symptoms all subsided. And so we took that and said, what could have possibly happened in those 10 seconds of walking into this restaurant that you had such a severe reaction? So we started learning about air quality. And we learned that I am essentially a canary for air quality and have extremely severe reactions. So with that, we started to learn about the components, like what makes up the air, what is good, what is bad, what are the different elements that are in the air, how does it affect your body? And we started really learning about triggers of inflammation and how often inflammatory responses are the root of many other illnesses. And just by managing my own health, I learned and lived this experience of improving and testing air quality and learning about air quality. So then when it came time to starting a business, I had had this bank of almost 2 decades of knowledge. And that's where it all came from. So when I was actually building Ecologica and trying to figure it out, the first thing I did was I cold called the entire med school board of directors for Western University, because that's where I did my undergrad and my master's.
It's amazing.
And and I left 16 30-second voicemails. And I had 2 people respond to me. One was the dean of biochemical engineering, and one was the head of epidemiology. And I pitched this idea of this technology, which is now the technology that Ecologica uses. And I said, will this work? And they said, yes, not only will this work, come build it in our lab under our supervision until you've figured it out. So that was just a really amazing experience, having someone just believe in you enough to not only validate you, but also give you access to resources, give you time. And there's something about doing those big asks that, yeah, you could be defeated by the fact that of the 16 people, only 2 got back and 14 people essentially ghosted you. But you don't need 16 people. You just need 1 or 2.
In the sales world, those are very high. That's a very high rate of return.
Yeah, exactly. So then I started building our products literally by walking around the Home Depot and buying random pieces and building it in my apartment and testing it and going to the lab. And the dean of biochemical engineering, his name is Franco. Him and I would like duct tape things together. Like we really did it really messy. And we just started. And with that, I learned a ton about what works and what doesn't work, how to test things, how to, create like a hypothesis and run things like a scientific experiments that things are measurable, what's working, what's not working, and how to scale those things and improve those things. I also learned about bill of materials and supply chains and working with sourcing agents and all of those kinds of things because I was doing it on the ground. And I felt like it was super important for me to be a part of every aspect of building and testing that technology because I wanted to know how it worked so that I could make smart business decisions for the company. And with that, you do become a bit of an expert.
Yeah.
And I remember Franco telling me this one time, him and I would have a meeting every Monday where we would talk about what was going on in the week, debrief from the previous week, et cetera. And I asked him this one question and he said, well, I'm not the subject matter expert on this. You are. And I was like, no, I'm not. And he said, you know this topic more than anybody at this lab. You are equipped to make this decision.
Why
And
is it that we don't? Yeah, like that. There are so many different ways of knowing, is what this story is telling me. And why is it that we need the credentials after our name in order to feel good about ourselves? Or why is it that our society needs it? And I think about that. And Laura, I'm interested too in your perspective on this because I think you definitely see Jenessa also as a subject matter expert. And hopefully, Jenessa, you see yourself as that. Do you now?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, great.
Anytime anybody gives me any pushback, I'm like, I don't think that you are a champion of entrepreneurs.
Is that what they're looking for? Are they looking for a master's in science,
Yeah.
chemistry, or I don't know what?
Creating something.
Okay.
Something STEM,
What is that about? And I guess we know what that's about. That's about our whole culture and society. We don't have to go there. Let's assume our community is smart enough to know why we look for that. But let me ask a little bit of a harder question, which is in the world of misinformation, which is the world we're in right now. How do we then credential? How do we trust sources? How do we know what we're reading is real and true? I think it's easy to fall back on those credentials. And maybe it is a way that we're teaching our kids, even like, how do you read things on the internet? How do you know this is actually a valid source of information? How do we incorporate different ways of knowing into that challenge?
Yeah. That was something that we ran into right away. Because, I don't have a master's in biochemical engineering and I don't have these backgrounds that people are expecting. Um, so people challenged it and they're like, well, you can't do that. That doesn't work. And really, I think that your path working through a problem, you don't need those credentials, but at a certain point, people do need something standardized because we don't know how to assess things. And when we were working through our early product, an example is we didn't have HEPA filters in our first product because our technology doesn't actually really need that because it's quite advanced. So we were trying to sell to different organizations, but they had a box to check. And that box was, does it have a HEPA 13 filter? Yes or no? And we were constantly getting shut down because it didn't check this box, even though we're like, well, if you understand the technology, you'll understand why you don't necessarily need that and want all these different benefits. But it didn't matter because the conversation was already closed. So there is a bit of like required conformity. So now all of our products have HEPA 13 filters, and that's great. And we're happy to have
that we can take out and use in our other products.
Yeah, exactly.
The bonus.
But there is a bit of conformity. And really what that comes down to is in my opinion, the fact that we live in such a saturated world of information.
Mhm.
So, because we have so much access and so much exposure to information, there has to be some way of measuring it that can be
Mhm.
standard across the board. So, yes, we have an extremely advanced technology, but people need to check the baseline boxes, and making it as easy as possible for people to get over those initial barriers to entry is just helpful. And that's also why we, cold called the med school board of directors,
Right.
because no, I don't have the credentials, but Franco does.
Someone on your
And
team has them. Yeah, someone
exactly,
has to have them. Does it have to be the founder? Not necessarily, because as you said, to
no,
circle back to the beginning, passion is an incredibly important engine for this company,
yes,
for all companies. I recently heard a quote. It said, someone said, "You don't have to be motivated; you have to be inspired."
yes,
Motivation is short term. Inspiration will drive you for a very, very long time. And I sort of think of inspiration and passion as kind of two sides of the same coin. And it feels like there's a ton of inspiration for both of you in this work, which is, yeah, I agree. It's something that can really drive you. What uh, Jenessa, you had talked about a story about being a professional athlete that really, for you, kind of personified or exemplified the entrepreneurial journey. Can you tell us about that? And I'm also excited because for listeners who can't see, Jenessa has a wall of sort of art behind her, which is deflated basketballs, but like actual basketballs strategically placed around in her background, and it's a beautiful piece of art. So I love the like athletic part of you as well, Janessa. So tell us that story, if you will.
yeah, absolutely. So like I had said in my earlier story, I became a professional athlete when I was 16 years old.
Mhm.
Um, I remember being 15 and being at the Olympic trials and being the youngest competitor at the Olympic trials. And I was terrified. It was so scary. I ended up missing the finals in the 400-meter hurdles by 7/1000ths of a second. And which is nothing. It's barely even measurable. But in my 15-year-old brain, I was like, I'm so glad I don't have to race again. I'm so scared.
Mm.
um, but yeah, so I became a professional athlete when I was 16, and you you go through a lot. I trained a ton, um, had a lot of injuries. I had chronic shin splints, which resulted
Mm.
in over 6 stress fractures and other fractures. I've had 3 surgeries. Honestly, you name it. I literally would run until my bones would break. And it was tough. I mean, it was extremely rewarding, but it was really, really hard. And I had this one day, I remember I was in grade 11, and there was this athlete, we were like frenemies, where off the track we were friends and we had, no issues with one another, whatever. But on the track, like, we were only looking at each other because we were the only kind of high caliber athletes in the area. So she was a year older than me. So she was consistently beating me. But I was not going to let that go. And there was this one day, and we were running head to head. And I was like, today is the day that this girl is going down. And I basically let go of all of my strategy and just ran like a crazy person. In the 400-meter hurdles, you start on the blocks, you have 10 hurdles, and it's actually a very rhythmic race. It's very strategic because you have to be able to lead with both legs. You want to lead with your left leg for as many of the first ones as you can. So your rhythm has to be extremely consistent so that you can have that. And I just went into a full blown sprint, wasn't pacing myself, wasn't doing my strategy. All I could think about was taking down this girl. And we get to like the 6th hurdle, and I am in the lead. And obviously your adrenaline at that point starts wearing off.
Hmm.
And I hit the sixth hurdle because, again, no technique, no nothing, just bad out of hell. And I hit the sixth hurdle and I wiped out, like full blown, like didn't catch myself, just completely fell down. And everybody runs past me. And this was a qualifying race for provincials. So if you don't land in the top, I think it's top eight, you don't move on. And I was at that time ranked seventh in the province. And this was the step, or sorry, second in the province.
Mm.
And this was the step before that. So this should have been a breeze for me.
Mm.
And I blacked out, but I ended up getting back up, getting over the next couple hurdles. And then I'm at the 10th hurdle and I come back to. And I'm like, where am I? What's going on? Go over the 10th hurdle, wipe out again, complete like track rash all over my whole body. I am bleeding. It is a disaster. And I end up getting up and finishing in seventh.
What?
So I so I end up qualifying for the next round. And yeah, I mean, I had a terrible time. I was really beaten up. In track, you run with spikes on. It's a type of shoe.
Yeah.
And my spikes had gotten stuck in my leg and just
Ew.
ripped my leg open.
Oh my God.
And I crossed the line and I just like collapsed and I just like laid in a heap.
Yeah.
And
How many racers were there? Were there only 7?
there were 8 in our heat. And there
Someone
were
was
3
behind
heats.
you?
Yeah. I was running really fast in the first half of the race.
That is, I wish I could see that. I watched the hurdles at the Olympics actually because I thought they're so
Okay.
much fun to watch. I know nothing about
Yeah.
it, but that, okay, keep going. So what did this teach you?
Yeah.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah. So during this time when I was an athlete, my dad always said that any setbacks are character building moments.
Mm.
And when you're going through, fractures and disappointments and you don't have a good race or practice isn't going well, or you kind of get yelled at by your coach, those are all character building moments.
Mm.
And I remember getting across that line. My parents came down onto the track. It's actually hilarious. They were videoing my race and you can hear their commentary. My mom's like, she's winning, she's winning, she's winning. And my dad is videoing. And then I wipe out and the camera gets all uneven and you hear, Greg, stop videoing. And then the video goes away. Poor parents couldn't handle it. But I remember they came down onto the track and I was sitting there and I was just in complete shock. I had a medic and they're trying to fix me up. And I was crying. And I said, like, when am I going to be done character building? And my dad said, in a classic dad response, not comforting at all, he said, well, apparently you've got a long ways to go.
Oh, no.
And
That's
it was really great lesson for me because that is so the story of entrepreneurship, where you are literally you're racing between adrenaline, trying to go fast, trying to have strategy. But you're also going over all of these hurdles and you have to overcome them. But then you also have to recover from what you just overcame. And you're probably going to wipe out. And it's, do you get back up at all? What does it look like when you do get back up? And what do you take away from it? And as much as all of those like injuries and heartbreaks and those kinds of things, I ended up being injured out of the sport. I was on the Olympic shadow team and never made it because I needed to have surgery. And all those kind of hopes and dreams disappear, but you find your way forward because you've built up that resilience. And all those lessons of character building when I was, 15, 16, 17, 18, whatever, have really carried me through because now when we overcome hurdles and sometimes when we fall, we still know that we can get back up and that it can still be okay. And
Yeah.
actually, I did end up coming second at provincials that year. So it all worked out.
Remember I said
Wow.
Jenessa likes to go fast?
That's amazing. That's an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Jenessa. It's just so hard to it's interesting because I think sort of pro sports and entrepreneurship both have a mysterious aspect to them. Um, Laura, I wondered if you could tell me like what are some of the bright, shiny moments of Ecologica in the last like little while? And yeah, like
Yeah.
what are the bragging rights right now?
It's so funny because I think it was maybe before we started recording, you mentioned something about like, you're going to encounter some of the worst days of your life during entrepreneurship, which is so accurate. But what's crazy sometimes is your worst day and your best day happen on the same day.
What?
Like
Tell me
there
more.
certain times where like you get an email and you didn't get into like a big thing that you wanted, or an investor has said no and you're like so disappointed. We call each other, I've cried many times and all that kind of stuff. And oh, I don't know, what are we doing wrong? And then like no joke, 3 hours later, another email comes in. You're like, oh my God, everything's great again.
Wow.
And so it's truly something that is so like it's such a pendulum. Like it's
Mhm.
such a pendulum at all times. And you just don't know which way it's gonna go. But you just kind of have to, go with the flow whenever you can. And then lean on each other for support. But yeah, I mean, we've had some exciting highlights, I would say. Jenessa, if I miss any, feel free to jump in. I think most recently, one of the exciting things that we got to do was we're part of an accelerator program that's actually run by the government of Canada. So it's run by the trade commissioners of New York, Denver, Boston, and San Fran. And they're incredible. And the trade commissioner's office actually runs a ton of different types of accelerators in different regions for different types of stuff. So this is particularly for climate tech. And we've been doing it for the last few months. Jenessa just came back from Verge, which is a huge climate conference that she was in market for with the accelerator. And I'm actually heading to Boston, New York, and Portland, Maine in 2 weeks to do the same with the in market portion on the East Coast. And it's been a really interesting experience because they're just so, obviously the government just has so much power to throw behind their name when they're like making a request to an investor or a potential customer or things like
Mhm.
that. Like it gives you a totally different air of legitimacy when you're talking to these people. And so it's been a really fun experience. And through that program, we got to interview for another program essentially, but that's run out of or like near Denver. It's the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or I think it's called NREL for short. And so they work with a ton of scientists, like they do a ton of research. Like it's a really interesting facility.
Mhm.
And we got into another program with them. So we're heading to their growth forum in March and all that kind of stuff. So it's like
Cool.
led to another really cool, very science and climate adjacent
Mm.
type program. And so it's like the last few months have just been really interesting and crazy for those types of things. We've been fundraising over the last while, so we're hopefully closing the round at the end of the year. And so if you ask me in like 6 weeks what the highlight of the year was, that hopefully will be the answer. But not counting our chickens until they're hatched. And so that's been really fun. We've got to travel a lot together too, which was really fun. We got to go to New York. I think that was a huge highlight for Jenessa and I. We got to spend a lot of quality time together, but
Mm.
we're there for New York Tech Week. And the reception that we got from quite literally strangers in general was really amazing. People were really excited to talk to us, really excited to learn more about what we were doing. One of our advisors had Jenessa be on one of the panels at Tech Week too. So that was really great
Awesome.
visibility for us. And so I think the honestly, like if overarchingly the highlight is just the momentum that we've
Yeah.
been able to gain over the last year. I know Jenessa uses this term, even though I've never known the feeling, is that like we're in the blocks before a race starts and like the gun's about to go off, right?
Mm.
Don't know what that feels like personally, I also recommend getting a co-founder who one runs and one doesn't, because there's a lot of like running adjacent, like pitch and run type events that I'm not going to be doing. So Jenessa is great for those. But it's one of those things where I think it's the build up that's
Mm,
been so incredibly cool to see this year, where
mm,
we truly feel like it's like we're about to take off
mm,
and all the pieces have fallen into or like are almost about to fall into place for that to be able to happen. And knowing that is around the corner, I think is also just so inspiring. And like it's just a daily inspiration to like work harder and make it happen and get it
mm,
done.
mm.
Because I think Janessa and I are ready for what I like to say is a new set of problems. You know, fundraising is one set of problems, being two people is one set of problems. When you hire, it's another set of problems.
Right.
And so we're excited for that next set of problems in the company.
And Laura, Janessa had said that she leans on you sometimes for to be her cheerleader when she's just like, I can't do this anymore. I shouldn't be doing this anymore. This is ridiculous, which we all have those days in all of our work. Where do you get your energy from, Laura?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, she's definitely done the same for me many times. So it's definitely a two-way street. That's no
Mm,
question. But I think, when we do get those questions of like, oh, well, you don't have a technical co-founder, or things like that. Like, I hope at least that when I jump in and I defend her honor, if you will,
mm,
because I just won't hear of anyone saying that. Like, I'm like, no, that is slander. She is a technical co-founder and I'm dying on that hill. And I will say that in calls without any, I think like I don't hesitate to step in and advocate for her in moments
mm,
where people are questioning her, whether she's around or not. But especially if she's not around, like I will advocate till the cows come home about her and what she's been able to accomplish. But I think too, it's having somebody remind you of all the things. Like it's easy to really get into the, oh my God, this thing didn't happen, or this thing wasn't successful, or
mhm.
we're not meeting the goal that I thought we would meet, right? It's easy to focus in on those problems because they're what you're facing. That's
Yep.
what's in front of you right now to get over. That's the hurdle. Whereas it's easy to lose focus of all the things you've done. So
Mm,
there's times just like, I'm really struggling with this. I'm like, yeah, but like you also struggled with that and you crushed it. Right. And it's a good reminder sometimes to know that, like, yeah, you know what? I've done that other hard thing that I didn't think I could do. And it was fine. And it all came back to light. But a lot of the times it's also just prioritizing. So we'll just take 10, 15, 20 minutes if we need it. And we'll sit down and we'll be like, okay, we have a lot of anxiety about all the things we need to get done. Let's make a list of like the first 3, 5, 10, like in order of importance. Let's like whether or whatever, how long time it'll take, right? So it's like in priority, but also is it a time consuming task and trying to balance those two things. Let's hammer some stuff out because we'll immediately feel better. And so just having that knowledge of like, okay, what's next
mm,
is I think really easy. But I mean, I think just having somebody in your corner that will remind you of things that you've been accomplishing and have accomplished and
mhm.
that is there as a support and an advocate. I think like those are really the key things, and absolutely she does that for me too.
I've heard
And
some people approach things as lean into your strengths and don't kind of worry about weaknesses. I know lots of people are famous for saying it. Tim Ferriss is famous for saying it. Is that something that you would characterize the way you work? Because I don't know. Sometimes I think, well, yes, but you've got to work on the weaknesses as well. Do you ever think about it like that?
I would say that's a really good question. I think we definitely know our strengths. What I think we focus on a lot is there are times where maybe something we're not really good at just needs to get done. And
Yeah.
that's just something that we have to deal with. There's times where I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. And you just kind of have to.
Hmm.
So there's certainly things where you just have to do it, you
Hmm.
know, and maybe it's not done super well, maybe it's not super pretty, whatever it is, but it has to get done.
Hmm.
I would say generally speaking though, we're really big on collaborating, and that
Hmm.
doesn't just mean with each other, that means externally as well. So we're not here to like reinvent the wheel for all parts of the company. So we're always like yeah, we can monitor a space, but we're also happy to plug into existing monitoring systems. We're happy to work with other places that already are collecting data and use their data for our data analytics platform. Like, we don't need to reinvent the monitoring wheel, if you will.
Right.
So we're happy to go out and find those people and find those partnerships and those strategics instead of just trying to like do our own thing, because it's not really necessary for what we're doing. I also think we're really good about knowing what our gaps are in terms of our knowledge, whether that be in terms of the actual technical knowledge or in terms of like who has the trust in the space that can put our name forward and people respect that opinion. Those are both really important components, right? Like, you can have somebody who's really technically inclined and knows everything, and that's great. But somebody who's like, whose name and opinion holds weight in big rooms, that's also very important when it comes to it.
That's great, Laura.
Yeah, so I think we have a really good balance. Folks who have some of that technical knowledge or like, but are like the experts in their space, absolutely just command the respect of the space. And to have those people saying our names in rooms we're not in, it's really, really,
it's amplifying. And you've got these two, you're leaning into your strengths, your strengths, and you outsource the rest in a way, or you outsource other aspects of it. And Jenessa, I wanted to jump to you too. And what does it take? What else does it take for you to run the day to day, whether it's in terms of relationship skills, strengths, what you lean on each other for?
Yeah, I would say that in order for us to just like keep moving forward, there's a bit of organization that needs to happen for sure. But also really what it comes down to for me, anytime I have to do something that I don't know how to do, or I don't think we have the skills for, or I feel like we have a big gap. Really what it comes down to is just knowing and really deeply believing in the vision of our business. And sometimes I ask myself, like, what would the world look like in 5 years if we weren't around? And do I like the way that that world looks? And if the answer is no, which it always is to me, then it's like, okay, then this is short-term pain for a long-term gain for not just ourselves, but for others as well. And that really helps to really move those things forward. Like, there are so many tasks that people think that entrepreneurship is fun and it's glamorous and it's traveling here and it's speaking at this and it's getting awards. But it's also like sitting down and doing your shred credits, which is not what you want to be spending your time on, but it helps your business grow.
That's right.
And so it's just putting in a mix of those responsibilities that are required for the business to grow, but also being able to build into something that you understand is playing into the larger picture, and just being okay with having to do both, not being tied down by perfectionism or trying to get things to be exactly right. One of the first quotes I ever heard was that when I started entrepreneurship was that if you're not embarrassed by your first version, you didn't move fast enough. And so you have to really like let go of your pride and be humble. And that is, being able to take feedback, being able to ask for help, recognizing your weaknesses and not just saying, oh, I've got the answer for everything. And really being willing and able to rely on other people and be vulnerable.
Those are beautiful words of advice. Sorry, go ahead, Laura.
No, I was going to say it's really funny because I was recently archiving a lot of our old pitch decks, and I opened one up and I was just like, I did a pitching session, a workshop recently for some founders. And I told them, I was like, we're probably on like version 46 of our deck over the last year with how many tweaks and changes and all that kind of stuff we've made. And it was one of those moments where I opened it and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe we use this deck. And someone else told me the same thing. They were like, if you're not embarrassed by the pitch deck that you used, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, whatever, 3 months ago, then you're not growing and you're not
even your
changing.
logo, even your, like our logo, that makes me feel so much better about things that like the beginnings of services or products that I've developed it at the very beginning. And I look back, I'm like, oh my God, no one can see that. But I love this reframe. Actually, that meant that you were focusing on the right things at the time.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful way for us to close. I think that that's amazing advice for anyone at any stage of their careers, also. And I just want to thank you for sharing so honestly and transparently about how it feels, how your journey has been influenced by your experiences, and the relationship between the two of you, which feels like a very, very healthy marriage from my perspective. I think that you're both so wonderful. And thank you so much for being on our podcast and part of our community.
Thanks so much for having us. This was so fun.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. It's our first time on a podcast together. So it's been a great time for us as well.
That's totally our pleasure. So excited to have met you both. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Stay connected with us via our socials and through our email list. And be sure to subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss our next episode. Have feedback on today's episode? Let us know directly in the app. Thanks again for listening and for joining the new wave of entrepreneurs. Till next time.